Hey, tonight we're diving into the fascinating world of the Nubian Black Pharaohs, rulers who turned the tables on one of history's greatest empires. But before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's. Close your eyes. Imagine a warm, dry breeze blowing over the sands of Africa. It's not the Egypt of Cleopatra or the pyramids of Giza. It's older, stranger, forgotten by most. It's the 8th century BCE, and the land is changing. Egypt, the once great kingdom of the pharaohs, is in trouble. The golden age is over. The pyramids still stand, and the gods are still worshipped, but the unity of Egypt has crumbled. What was once a powerful empire is now broken into pieces. Local warlords and regional kings squabble like bickering siblings. The mighty Nile flows, but the power of Pharaoh does not. This is a time historians call the Third Intermediate Period, a polite academic phrase for a total mess. Northern Egypt is under the thumb of Libyan warlords. The southern part has its own rulers, and even the high priests of Amun, the most important god in Egypt, act like kings themselves. Everyone claims to be in charge. No one really is. Into this chaos steps a man named Pa. Now, Pa is not from Egypt, not exactly. He comes from Napata, a city far to the south, in a land called Kush. Today, we call this region Nubia, and it lies mostly in modern-day Sudan. In the old Egyptian way of thinking, this was the edge of the civilized world, but that's not how the Nubians saw it. Their kingdom was ancient, proud, and deeply spiritual. They had adopted many Egyptian traditions, but they also had their own gods, their own ways, and their own ambitions. Pa was a Kushite king, young, intelligent, deeply religious, and unshakably confident. And as he looked north toward a divided and flailing Egypt, he saw an opportunity. Not to conquer, not just to rule, but to restore. In Pa's mind, Egypt wasn't just a kingdom. It was a sacred order. A cosmic balance. A concept the Egyptians called Ma'at, the divine harmony of the universe. When Ma'at was in balance, the Nile flooded predictably, the harvests were good, and the gods were pleased. But when it was broken, when rulers were corrupt, or the temples neglected, the world began to unravel. Pa believed that Ma'at had been lost in Egypt, and he believed it was his duty to bring it back. But Pa didn't set out like a conqueror in shining armor. He moved like a priest with an army, part philosopher king, part warlord, and part savior. He wasn't simply coming to take over Egypt. He was coming to heal it, and he believed that his faith in the god Amun, the king of the gods, gave him the right and responsibility to do so. In his capital city of Napata, at the base of a sacred mountain called Jebel Barkal, Pa prayed, prepared, and planned. The temple of Amun there was just as grand, just as holy, as any in Egypt. In Pa's mind, the true spirit of Egypt had already moved south, and he was the only one who could bring it back. You might imagine the Kushites as desert nomads or outsiders, but that's not the case. They were closely tied to Egyptian culture. Their kings spoke Egyptian, wrote in hieroglyphs, and worshipped Egyptian gods. But they also had their own identity, one that mixed African roots with pharaonic legacy. Pa saw no contradiction in being both Nubian and pharaoh. In fact, he saw it as destiny. But there's another side to this story, one that's easy to forget as we lie comfortably in bed, listening to ancient echoes. Pa was a black African king at a time when most of the world didn't even know what Africa was. He ruled a powerful kingdom that the Greeks barely mentioned and that modern textbooks too often skipped over. Yet here he was, about to ride north, not only to reclaim Egypt, but to reshape history. So, as the sun set over Napata and the stars rose above the desert, Pa began to act. He didn't send envoys. He didn't negotiate from a distance. He gathered his troops, a fearsome force of Nubian archers, cavalry, and chariots. These weren't ragtag warriors. They were elite fighters, disciplined and loyal. Many Egyptian cities had never seen anything like them. And so, The slow march north began. But before there were battles, there were prayers. Before there was blood, there was ritual. Pa made offerings to a moon. He bathed in sacred waters. He didn't just want victory, he wanted divine approval. And that made him powerful in ways most kings weren't. To Pa, this wasn't just war. This was divine work. And maybe that's the part we should remember most, that long before colonial borders or modern nations, long before textbooks made Egypt a land of only pyramids and mummies, there was a time when a black king from Nubia looked north and decided to restore a fallen world. Not for glory. Not for gold. But for something he believed was sacred. He was Pa, king of Kush, servant of the moon. And his story was just beginning. Pa's holy war, the conquest of Egypt. So now, we return to the desert. Pa has left his capital in Napata, his mind full of prayers, his mission blessed by the god Amun. And in front of him, stretching like the winding spine of Africa, lies the great Nile River. To the north, chaos. Egypt. Fractured, lawless, and waiting. But this isn't just a military campaign. Not to Pa. He wasn't marching as a conqueror, at least not in his own mind. He was coming to restore. To purify. To heal a sacred land that had forgotten what made it sacred. And so, what follows was not just war. It was, in every sense Pa believed, a holy war. Let's start with his army. Pa's forces weren't vast by today's standards, but in the ancient world, they were formidable. Especially his archers, the famous Nubian bowmen. In every corner of the ancient world, from the deserts of Egypt to the stone cities of Mesopotamia, these men were known and feared. Their bows were long, powerful, and deadly accurate. Their arrows could pierce armor. Their eyes were sharp as eagles. For centuries, Egyptians themselves had hired Nubians as mercenaries. Now, those same archers were coming, but not as hired help. As the tip of a divine spear. These weren't ragged fighters, either. Pa's troops were trained, loyal, and devout. Before battle, they offered prayers. Before marching into a new town, they paid respect to the gods, both their own and the local deities. They didn't just march in and burn. They observed. They negotiated. But when they fought like lightning. And Pa himself? He didn't just stay behind the lines. He led, not in the way modern generals do, with maps and radios, but in the old way. A pharaoh in full regalia, commanding from a chariot, his black skin shining with oil in the Egyptian sun. On his brow, the double uraeus, a crown with two cobras, one representing Upper Egypt, the other Lower. A powerful symbol, usually worn only by the true ruler of the United Egypt. Pa wore it before he even took Memphis. In his heart, he already was Pharaoh. Now, this campaign wasn't quick. It wasn't a blitz. It was a slow, deliberate sweep, city by city, temple by temple. Pa wasn't just interested in military targets. He was interested in symbolism, in sacred legitimacy. His victories were not just victories of steel, but of spirit. The cities he approached were ruled by warlords, some Egyptian, some Libyan, all opportunistic. Most had no loyalty to each other. They had made Egypt into a patchwork quilt of fragile alliances and petty rivalries. One by one, Pa offered them a choice: submit peacefully, recognize his divine authority and offer homage to Amun. Or resist and face destruction. Many submitted. Some after brief resistance, some after none at all. Pa allowed local leaders to remain in power, as long as they swore loyalty, paid tribute, and recognized Amun as the supreme god. This wasn't just politics, it was a spiritual reshuffling. In every town that joined him, he restored temples, honored priests, and publicly declared the return of Ma'at, the divine order. But not everyone cooperated. The greatest challenge came from a city that was once the heart of Egypt's power, Memphis. Memphis, located at the boundary between Upper and Lower Egypt, had once been the capital of great dynasties. By Pa's time, it was still a city of immense symbolic importance. Whoever held Memphis controlled not just the land, but the right to claim the title of pharaoh. The warlord who controlled Memphis was Tefnakht, a powerful Libyan prince who had cobbled together a coalition of northern cities. He considered himself a king in his own right. And he had no intention of surrendering to some southern outsider, no matter how spiritual his mission. When Pa's army approached, Tefnut tried to stand firm. He fortified Memphis. He rallied allies. He likely mocked the idea that this Nubian priest-king could lay claim to all of Egypt. But Pa was not deterred. What followed was not a quick siege. It was a calculated demonstration of force, both military and divine. Pa's army cut off Memphis from the south, surrounding it with troops and archers. According to surviving records, he gave his enemies the chance to surrender. When they refused, he stormed the outer defenses, taking key fortresses and cutting through the city's lines of supply. He moved not like a barbarian, but like a surgeon, removing resistance piece by piece. And finally, Memphis fell. But what Pa did next was unexpected. He didn't sack the city. He didn't burn its temples or execute its leaders. Instead, he entered the great temple, made offerings to the gods, and proclaimed the restoration of Ma'at. He washed himself in holy waters. He knelt before Amun. And then, as if fulfilling a prophecy, he commissioned an inscription to commemorate the moment. This wasn't just any record. It was the victory stela of Pa, carved in stone, written in elegant hieroglyphs, and placed in a temple for all to see. In it, Pa described his campaign, not as a war, but as a religious crusade. He didn't boast about loot or destruction. He wrote of purity, of piety, of the joy of seeing Amun's temples restored. He described his enemies not as villains, but as misguided souls who had forgotten the sacred path. And he presented himself, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian of the old ways. It is, by all accounts, one of the most unique royal inscriptions in Egyptian history. Where other kings bragged of violence, Pa spoke of duty. Where others demanded obedience, he offered harmony. And then, in a move that seems strange by modern standards, Pa returned to Nubia. Yes, really. After conquering much of Egypt, after taking Memphis, after restoring temples and toppling warlords, he didn't stay. He left governors in place, loyal to him and to Amun, and went back to Napata. Back to his desert homeland. Back to Jebel Barkal. Why? We can only guess. Maybe he had no desire to rule from a throne in the north. Maybe he believed his mission was already complete. Or maybe he understood something that many conquerors forget, that the more you hold on to power, the more it slips through your fingers. From his seat in Napata, Pa governed through his appointed successors. And in the years that followed, his dynasty, known today as Egypt's 25th dynasty, the so-called Nubian dynasty, would become one of the most fascinating in all of Egyptian history. But that's a story for another night. For now, remember this: a black king from Nubia, led by faith and guided by ancient ideals, marched north into a divided land, and without destroying it, he made it whole again. Not through sheer force, but through something far rarer: belief. The dust of the northern campaigns had barely settled on the banks of the Nile when Pa, now the undisputed master of the domain stretching from the heart of Nubia to the shimmering Mediterranean, made a decision that would define the early character of the 25th dynasty. Egypt, with its ancient splendors and newly bowed princes, was his. Yet, for Pa, the son of Cush, the true heart of his burgeoning empire lay south, in his ancestral capital of Napata, nestled beneath the sacred gaze of Jebel Barkal, the pure mountain believed to be an alternate dwelling of the great god Amun. It wasn't that Pa undervalued his Egyptian conquest. Far from it. He had, in his eyes and in the pronouncements he would soon commission, restored Ma'at, truth, balance, and cosmic order, to a land that had strayed. He had honored Amun, the deity revered in both Thebes and Napata, thereby spiritually legitimizing his rule. But to remain indefinitely in Memphis or Thebes would be to become an Egyptian pharaoh who happened to be Nubian. Pa envisioned something grander, more integrated, a dual kingdom, where the might and ancient traditions of Kush would not be subsumed but would stand as an equal, if not senior, partner to the northern realm. Napata would remain the ideological and spiritual wellspring of his authority. Thus, after ensuring the mechanisms of control were in place, Pa began preparations for his triumphal return to Nubia. This was no quiet departure. It was a procession befitting a victorious pharaoh, laden with the tribute of a humbled Egypt: gold, silver, precious linens, exotic goods, and perhaps even skilled artisans and scribes. The journey south, upstream along the life-giving Nile, would have been a spectacle, a reverse echo of his conquering fleet, now affirming his dominion to every settlement along the riverbanks, Egyptian and Nubian alike. Imagine the great royal barge, adorned with the symbols of both Upper and Lower Egypt now united under his Kushite crown, its passage marked by celebration and awe. Back in Napata, his arrival would have been met with ecstatic jubilation. Here was their king, who had ventured into the fractured land of the north, a land that had once dominated Nubia, and returned as its supreme ruler. The temples of Amun at Jebel Barkal would have resounded with hymns of praise, and lavish offerings would have commemorated this unprecedented achievement. For the Kushites, this was not just a military victory, it was a divine affirmation of their power and piety, a testament to their king's favor with Amun. But how to govern the vast, complex, and often fractious land of Egypt from such a distance? This was where PA's political acumen, often overshadowed by his military prowess and religious fervor, truly shone. He understood that direct Kushite rule over every nome and city in Egypt was impractical and would likely breed resentment. Instead, he implemented a system that was a masterstroke of political pragmatism. He allowed many of the Egyptian dynasts and local rulers, the very men who had opposed him and whose submissions he had so meticulously recorded, to retain their positions of authority. This wasn't an act of naive magnanimity. It was a calculated strategy. These local lords, men like Nimlot of Hermopolis, whose horses PA had famously lamented more than his rebellion, or Azor Khan IV of Tanis, knew the intricacies of their regional administrations. They could maintain order, collect taxes, and manage local affairs far more effectively than newly imposed Kushite governors unfamiliar with the local landscape and populace. Their continued rule, however, came with a critical caveat: unwavering loyalty to PA as their overlord. This loyalty would be sworn through solemn oaths, backed by the regular payment of tribute to the Kushite crown and, undoubtedly, the understanding that any sign of rebellion would bring swift retribution from the Nubian forces that remained strategically garrisoned or could be rapidly deployed. PA's victory stele, a monumental granite slab inscribed with hieroglyphs detailing his campaign, serves as the primary historical document for this period and offers invaluable insight into his mindset. Erected at the Temple of Amun in Jebel Barkal, it was a powerful piece of propaganda, intended for both a Nubian and, implicitly, an Egyptian audience, as its contents would surely be known. The stele meticulously lists the conquered cities and the humbled rulers, emphasizing their prostration before him. It paints PA not as a brutal conqueror, but as a righteous champion of Amun, disgusted by the Egyptians' decadent ways, like their uncircumcised status or their internal squabbling, and their neglect of proper religious observance. He even details his anger at finding horses starving in Nimlot's stables, a curiously personal touch that humanizes him while subtly reinforcing his moral superiority. By allowing these rulers to continue, PA transformed them from defeated enemies into vassals, their authority now derived from his own. To ensure this system functioned and that Kushite interests were paramount, PA would have entrusted key oversight roles and perhaps direct governance in strategically vital areas like Thebes, with its powerful Amun priesthood deeply connected to Nubia, to his most trusted lieutenants and family members. While the stele doesn't explicitly name a long-term viceroy for all of Egypt upon his immediate return, it's logical to assume that his brothers, sons, or other high-ranking Kushite officials formed the backbone of this supervisory structure, paving the way for the more formalized appointments of his successors like Shabaka. These individuals would serve as his eyes and ears, ensuring the flow of tribute, the adherence to his decrees, and the maintenance of peace. This arrangement, while practical, was not without its challenges. The vast distance between Napata and the Egyptian delta meant that communication was slow, reliant on river traffic. News of unrest or the machinations of a disloyal vassal would take weeks to reach PA, and his response would take equally long to be implemented. This necessitated a high degree of trust in his representatives and a clear understanding among the Egyptian lords that the consequences of betrayal were severe. Yet, for the remainder of PA's reign, This system largely held, a testament to the fear and respect he commanded, and perhaps also to a degree of weariness among the Egyptians, who may have welcomed the relative stability his overarching authority brought after decades of fragmentation. However, Pa's vision extended beyond mere political and military control. He sought to leave an indelible mark, one that would celebrate his reign and firmly establish the Kushite presence within the pharaonic tradition, yet also assert its unique identity. This found its most enduring expression not in Egypt, but back in his Nubian heartland, at the royal necropolis of El Kuru, a short distance downstream from Napata. For centuries, Egyptian pharaohs had been interred in elaborate tombs, most famously the Great Pyramids of the Old Kingdom at Giza, and later in rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings. While pyramid building in Egypt had largely ceased for rulers by this era, though smaller private pyramids were still sometimes constructed, Pa made the momentous decision to revive this ancient tradition for his dynasty, but with a distinct Nubian character. This was a profound statement. By adopting the pyramid, the ultimate symbol of Egyptian pharaonic power and divinity, Pa was unequivocally claiming his place and that of his lineage within the succession of legitimate Egyptian rulers. He was not merely a foreign conqueror, he was a true pharaoh, chosen by Amun. The pyramids of El Kuru, however, were not slavish imitations of their Giza counterparts. They were uniquely Kushite. Considerably smaller in scale, they were characterized by much steeper sides, typically angled at around 68 to 70 degrees, compared to the approximately 51 degrees of the Great Pyramid of Giza, giving them a taller, more slender appearance relative to their base. They were constructed of local sandstone and often featured a small mortuary temple or offering chapel built against the eastern face, a feature that had also been part of earlier Egyptian pyramid complexes. Pa was the first Kushite king to receive such a burial at El Kuru, setting a precedent that his successors in the 25th dynasty would follow. His own pyramid, designated Q.1, though now heavily ruined, was excavated by George Reisner in the early 20th century. While the superstructure is mostly gone, the substructure revealed a burial chamber accessed by a stairway, its walls once possibly adorned with painted scenes or texts, in the Egyptian manner. Within, though plundered in antiquity, remnants of funerary goods and the bodies of horses, a creature Pa famously cherished, buried nearby, attested to the richness of his burial rites. The inclusion of horse burials was a distinct Nubian custom, underscoring the cultural synthesis at play. The construction of these pyramids at El Kuru was more than just a funerary practice, it was an act of ideological assertion. It physically anchored the new dynasty's legitimacy in a tradition revered by Egyptians, while simultaneously differentiating it through unique architectural features. It signaled that Kush was not merely an extension of Egypt, but a powerful kingdom with its own ancient roots, now taking its rightful place on the world stage, capable of reinterpreting and reinvigorating even the most iconic symbols of pharaonic power. El Kuru became the dynastic cemetery, a sacred landscape that would grow with each successive Kushite ruler, a silent testament to their piety, power, and their extraordinary claim over the two lands. Pa's reign, after the conquest of Egypt and his return to Napata, was thus characterized by a delicate balancing act, ruling a vast, culturally distinct northern territory through a system of delegated authority and Kushite oversight, while simultaneously consolidating his power base in Nubia and laying the foundations for a dynastic legacy that was both pharaonic and uniquely Kushite. His decision not to permanently relocate his administration to Egypt but to govern from Napata emphasized the Nubian origins and spiritual core of his empire. His revival of pyramid building at El Kuru visually cemented his dynasty's claim to pharaonic legitimacy while proudly asserting its Nubian identity. He had not just conquered Egypt, he had reframed the centuries-old relationship between the two lands, establishing a new paradigm where the vile Kush of old Egyptian chauvinism now held the reins of power, guided, as Pa saw it, by the will of Amun and a commitment to restoring Ma'at. His actions laid the groundwork for nearly a century of Kushite rule over Egypt, a remarkable chapter in the long history of the Nile Valley. The reign of Pa, the Lion of Kush, had been one of audacious conquest and visionary assertion. He had yoked the fractured land of Egypt to his Nubian crown, not merely as a conqueror, but as a divine agent of Amun, a restorer of Ma'at. Yet, having achieved this monumental feat and laid the groundwork for a new imperial structure, Pa's focus remained deeply rooted in his ancestral homeland of Napata. The day-to-day administration of the vast northern territories, while overseen by his loyalists, would require a more permanent, embedded Kushite presence to truly solidify the dynasty's grip and weave its destiny into the ancient fabric of Egypt. This formidable task would fall to his successor, Shabaka. The transition of power from Pa to Shabaka, often identified as his brother, appears to have been relatively seamless, a testament to the strength of the Kushite royal house. Shabaka inherited an empire of unprecedented scale for a Nubian ruler, an empire that was still, in many ways, a recent acquisition. While Pa had established the framework of Kushite overlordship, it was Shabaka who would dedicate his reign to the intricate work of consolidation, of transforming a conquered territory into an integral part of a functioning dual kingdom, and of deepening the dynasty's legitimacy in the eyes of the Egyptian people, particularly its influential priesthoods and noble families. One of Shabaka's most significant early decisions, and one that marked a distinct shift from Pa's approach, was his choice of primary residence and administrative capital. While Napata remained the spiritual and ancestral heartland, Shabaka understood that to effectively govern Egypt, the pharaoh needed to be in Egypt. He chose Memphis as his principal seat of power. This was a profoundly symbolic and strategically astute move. Memphis, near modern-day Cairo, was not just any city. It was one of Egypt's most ancient capitals, dating back to the dawn of the Old Kingdom, the era of the Great Pyramid builders. It was the traditional administrative hub, perfectly situated at the apex of the Nile Delta and the gateway to Upper Egypt. Furthermore, Memphis was the cult center of Ptah, the craftsman god, the divine patron of artisans, and, in Memphite theology, the primordial creator of the universe. By establishing his court in Memphis, Shabaka was making several powerful statements. He was positioning himself directly within the historical lineage of Egypt's most revered pharaohs. He was signaling a hands-on approach to governance, a commitment to being an active ruler of his Egyptian domain, not a distant overlord. And, crucially, he was aligning himself with Ptah, one of Egypt's oldest and most profound deities, thereby broadening the religious foundations of Kushite rule beyond the primary devotion to Amun, which, while powerful in Thebes and Napata, might not have resonated as deeply with the political and religious elites of Lower Egypt. The establishment of a royal court in Memphis would have been a considerable undertaking. Palaces would need to be renovated or built, administrative offices established, and a retinue of Kushite and loyal Egyptian officials assembled. This physical presence of the Kushite pharaoh and his administration in the traditional heart of Egyptian power sent an undeniable message. The 25th dynasty was not a temporary occupation but a new, legitimate line of rulers committed to the governance and well-being of Kemet, the Black Land. Shabaka's reign was characterized by a profound focus on what could be termed cultural consolidation. He recognized that military might alone could not secure long-term Kushite rule. True dominion required acceptance, legitimacy, and a sense of shared purpose. He embarked on a deliberate program of restoring and honoring ancient Egyptian religious traditions, a policy that not only served to appease and integrate the powerful Egyptian priesthoods but also reinforced the Kushite self-image as pious restorers of a venerable culture that had, in their view, declined during the preceding period of division. This wasn't merely about superficial gestures. Shabaka initiated and supported significant building and restoration projects at temples throughout Egypt. He, like Pa, understood the deep connection between pharaonic authority and divine sanction. By patronizing the gods of Egypt, he was reinforcing his own legitimacy as their chosen representative on earth. This archaizing tendency, a conscious looking back to and revival of older forms and traditions, was a hallmark of the 25th dynasty. It was a way for these foreign rulers to demonstrate their deep respect for, and understanding of, Egyptian heritage, thereby presenting themselves not as alien conquerors but as righteous sovereigns more Egyptian in their piety than some of their recent native predecessors. Perhaps the most famous and enduring testament to Shabaka's program of cultural and religious restoration is the monument known today as the Shabaka Stone. This imposing slab of black basalt, now housed in the British Museum, is far more than just an ancient artifact. It is a profound statement of theological preservation and royal piety. The story of its creation, as inscribed on the stone itself, is that Shabaka discovered an ancient papyrus scroll, a sacred text containing the tenets of Memphite theology, which was unfortunately worm-eaten and decaying. Recognizing its immense religious and historical importance, and lamenting its fragile state, Shabaka ordered that its contents be meticulously copied and inscribed onto this durable stone monument, to be preserved for eternity within the Temple of Ptah in Memphis. This act was laden with significance. Firstly, it demonstrated Shabaka's deep reverence for ancient wisdom and his commitment to safeguarding Egypt's religious heritage. It positioned him as a scholar king, a protector of sacred knowledge. Secondly, by choosing to preserve the Memphite theology, he was specifically honoring Ptah, the patron deity of his chosen capital. This theology presents a unique and sophisticated cosmology, attributing the creation of the universe to Ptah, who conceived all of creation in his heart, mind/thought, and brought it into being through his tongue, speech/authoritative utterance. This concept of creation through divine intellect and word, personified as the deities Sia and Hu, respectively, attributes of Ptah, is one of the most intellectually profound creations of ancient Egyptian thought. The Shabaka stone itself describes how Ptah, after conceiving the forms of all gods, humans, animals, and indeed everything that exists, then uttered the words that gave them substance and life. It establishes Memphis as the very fulcrum of creation, the place where the primeval land first rose from the waters of chaos, and where kingship was first established. For Shabaka to champion this text was to inextricably link his reign, and his capital, to the very origins of the cosmos and of pharaonic rule itself. The commissioning of the stone was a public declaration of his devotion to Ptah and a powerful act of cultural patronage that would resonate through the ages. Modern scholars owe Shabaka an immense debt, as this stone is the primary surviving source for this vital aspect of Egyptian religious philosophy. Beyond such high-profile acts of preservation, Shabaka's administration would have focused on stabilizing the governance structures PA had put in place. This likely involved strengthening the loyalty of the vassal Egyptian princes, perhaps through a combination of continued respect for their local authority and subtle reminders of Kushite military power. He may have undertaken tours of inspection, officiated at important religious festivals in various cities, and ensured that the flow of tribute and resources was managed efficiently. His reign seems to have been less about military campaigning and more about the careful cultivation of peace, order, and cultural flourishing within the boundaries of his now consolidated empire. Building projects, even beyond temple restorations and the Shabaka stone, were likely part of his agenda. Fortifications might have been strengthened, particularly in the eastern delta, where the growing shadow of the Assyrian Empire was beginning to loom, a distant but gathering storm that would eventually test his successors to their limits. For now, however, Shabaka's primary concern was internal cohesion. He understood that a united, religiously observant, and well-governed Egypt, respectful of its Kushite pharaoh, was the best defense against any external threat. Shabaka's personal identity as a Kushite, even while ruling from Memphis and championing Egyptian traditions, remained clear. The art and royal titulary of the period continued to blend Egyptian and Nubian elements. While he adopted the full fivefold titulary of an Egyptian pharaoh, inscriptions and depictions would still often incorporate Kushite iconography, such as the distinctive cap crown or the uraeus, the two cobras on the royal brow, perhaps symbolizing his rule over both Egypt and Kush, or a particularly potent form of protection. His Nubian name, Shabaka, was proudly used alongside his Egyptian throne names. This cultural duality was a defining feature of the 25th dynasty, a constant negotiation between two powerful ancient African traditions. Thus, Shabaka's reign was pivotal. He transformed PA's conquest into a more stable and integrated imperial system. He cemented the dynasty's legitimacy through a masterful program of religious restoration and cultural patronage, epitomized by the Shabaka stone. By choosing Memphis as his capital and ruling from within Egypt, he demonstrated a commitment to the governance of the northern kingdom that was both practical and deeply symbolic. He was the scholar pharaoh, the pious restorer, who ensured that the Kushite grip on the double crown was not just militarily enforced but culturally and religiously embedded. His efforts created a period of relative stability and cultural renaissance, ensuring that the legacy of the Black Pharaohs would be one of profound engagement with, and contribution to, the ancient civilization of Egypt. The stability and cultural reverence fostered by Shabaka created a fertile ground for his successor, Taharka, to ascend to the double throne of Egypt and Kush. Often identified as a son of Pa and thus a nephew to Shabaka, Taharka inherited an empire that was, for the moment, relatively secure and prosperous. He was a younger man, imbued with a potent ambition and a vision for Kushite glory that would manifest in stone on an unprecedented scale. If Pa was the conqueror and Shabaka the consolidator, Taharka was destined to be the great builder, the pharaoh under whom the artistic and architectural splendor of the 25th dynasty would reach its most breathtaking heights, even as the storm clouds of foreign invasion gathered relentlessly on the eastern horizon. The early years of Taharka's reign were a golden age of construction. From the northern delta of Egypt to the southern reaches of Nubia around the Fourth Cataract, Taharka's name and image were etched into temple walls, colossal statues, and towering columns. He didn't just restore or add to existing structures, he initiated entirely new, monumental projects that proclaimed the power, piety, and permanence of his rule. His ambition was boundless, fueled by the resources of a unified Nile Valley and a deep-seated desire to rival, and perhaps even surpass, the legendary builders of Egypt's past, all while clearly stamping these works with a distinctive Kushite identity. At Karnak, the sprawling religious heart of Thebes and the domain of Amun-Ra, Taharka left an indelible mark. He constructed a magnificent colonnade in the temple's first court, with 10 colossal columns, each soaring nearly 70 feet high, crowned with elaborate open papyrus capitals. Though only one of these majestic pillars remains standing today, its sheer scale and exquisite relief carvings offer a tantalizing glimpse into the grandeur of Taharka's vision. He also built a unique edifice known as the Lake Edifice or Kiosk of Taharka by the sacred lake at Karnak, used for important religious ceremonies. His work here was a clear statement of his devotion to Amun, the dynastic god, and his right to rule as a legitimate pharaoh in the very sanctuary of Egyptian religious power. But Taharka's building program was not confined to Thebes. Back in his Nubian heartland, he lavished attention on Jebel Barkal, the sacred mountain of Amun near Napata. He significantly expanded the existing temple complex, adding new courts and sanctuaries. He commissioned rock-cut temples, carving shrines directly into the cliff face of the holy mountain, most notably a temple dedicated to the goddess Mut, consort of Amun. These structures, with their blend of Egyptian architectural forms and distinctly Nubian artistic sensibilities, reinforced Jebel Barkal's status as a paramount religious center for the Kushite Empire, a southern counterpart to Thebes. Further south, at Kawa, opposite modern-day Dongola in Nubia, Taharka erected a truly magnificent temple complex dedicated to Amun, adorned with statues, sphinxes, and extensive reliefs depicting his piety and royal authority. Other sites like Sanam, also in Nubia, saw the construction of treasure houses and temples. His inscriptions and monuments have been found throughout the Nile Valley, a testament to an empire-wide building program that sought to visually unify his vast domains under a shared religious and royal ideology. These weren't just acts of piety, they were sophisticated assertions of imperial power, providing employment for thousands, stimulating local economies, and creating enduring symbols of the pharaoh's might and divine favor. This period of prolific construction and apparent stability, however, was lived under the ever-lengthening shadow of the Assyrian Empire. Based in Mesopotamia, the Assyrians had been steadily expanding westward, forging a brutal and efficient military machine. Their armies, equipped with iron weapons, sophisticated siege engines, and a ruthless doctrine of warfare, had already subjugated much of the Levant, the city-states and kingdoms along the eastern Mediterranean coast that often served as a buffer zone for Egypt. Taharqa, even as a prince before his full ascension to the throne, perhaps as a co-regent or military commander under Shabaka or his immediate successor Shabaiku, had his first significant encounter with Assyrian power around 701 BCE. King Hezekiah of Judah, in an attempt to throw off the Assyrian yoke, had rebelled against Sennacherib, the formidable Assyrian king. As Sennacherib laid siege to Jerusalem, Hezekiah appealed to Egypt for aid. The Cushite-led Egypt responded. The Hebrew Bible, 2 Kings 19:9 and Isaiah 37:9, records that Sennacherib heard a rumor, Tirhakah, king of Cush, has set out to fight against you. Taharqa, the biblical Tirhakah, led an Egyptian Cushite army into Palestine to confront the Assyrians. While the outcome of the direct military engagement is debated by historians, Assyrian accounts claim a victory, while the biblical narrative attributes the Assyrian withdrawal from Jerusalem to divine intervention, an angel smiting the Assyrian camp. The fact remains that Sennacherib failed to capture Jerusalem and subsequently withdrew. Taharqa's intervention, even if not a decisive military triumph, had demonstrated Egypt Cush's willingness to project power into the Levant and challenge Assyrian dominance. It placed Taharqa on the international stage as a significant player. This early success, however, only delayed the inevitable collision course. The Assyrian ambition for regional hegemony was relentless. Under Sennacherib's successor, Esarhaddon, reigned 681 to 669 BCE. The Assyrian gaze turned more directly towards the rich prize of Egypt itself. Esarhaddon, a determined and capable ruler, launched his first invasion attempt around 674 BCE, but Taharqa's forces managed to repel it. This victory would have bolstered Taharqa's prestige, but the respite was temporary. In 671 BCE, Esarhaddon returned with a larger, more prepared army. This time, the Assyrians were successful. They smashed through the Egyptian Cushite defenses in a series of brutal battles, culminating in the capture of Memphis, Taharqa's northern capital. Taharqa himself was wounded and forced to flee south, first to Thebes and then perhaps even further into Nubia to regroup. Esarhaddon, proclaiming himself king of Egypt, Pathros, and Cush, established Assyrian control over Lower Egypt, installing local Egyptian princes as vassals. He commemorated his victory with triumphal stelae, one famously depicting Taharqa's son, Ashankharu, as a captive. Yet, Taharqa was nothing if not resilient. The moment Esarhaddon withdrew the bulk of his forces from Egypt to deal with other matters in his vast empire, he would die en route back to Egypt to quell a rebellion. Taharqa swept back north from his southern refuge. Displaying remarkable speed and determination, he managed to recapture Memphis and incite a widespread revolt against Assyrian rule and their appointed vassals. For a brief period, it seemed as though Taharqa had miraculously restored Kushite control. This resurgence, however, provoked the full wrath of Esarhaddon's son and successor, Ashurbanipal, reigned 669 to 631 BCE, one of Assyria's most powerful and ruthless kings. Determined to crush Taharqa once and for all and secure Egypt, Ashurbanipal launched a massive invasion around 667 BCE. Once again, Memphis fell. Taharqa was driven south. But the decisive, catastrophic blow came a few years later, around 664–663 BCE. Ashurbanipal's forces, perhaps aided by some Egyptian vassals eager to rid themselves of Kushite rule, pushed relentlessly up the Nile. They reached Thebes, the ancient religious capital, the sacred city of Amun, which had stood inviolate for centuries. What followed was one of the great tragedies of ancient history, the sack of Thebes. Assyrian soldiers plundered its magnificent temples, stripped them of their treasures, gold, silver, precious statues, and carried them off to Nineveh. They even took two massive electrum-coated obelisks from Karnak. The devastation was immense, not just materially but psychologically. The fall and pillaging of Thebes, a city revered throughout the ancient world, sent shockwaves across the Near East and signaled the effective end of Kushite dominion over Egypt. The prophet Nahum in the Hebrew Bible would later use the fate of Thebes, Noaman, as a chilling example of divine judgment against prideful cities when prophesying the downfall of Nineveh itself. Taharka, defeated and heartbroken, was forced to retreat definitively to his Nubian homeland. He would never regain control of Egypt. The Assyrians consolidated their power, though they too found Egypt difficult to govern directly, increasingly relying on the Saite princes of the Delta, particularly Samtuk I, who would eventually outmaneuver his Assyrian overlords and establish the native Egyptian 26th dynasty, effectively ending the era of the Black Pharaohs in Egypt. Despite this devastating loss, Taharka continued to reign as a powerful and respected king in Nubia for several more years. His spirit, though battered, was not broken. He focused his energies on strengthening his Kushite kingdom, continuing his building projects within Nubia. He established a new royal necropolis at Nuri, on the opposite bank of the Nile from Jebel Barkal and slightly downstream from El Kuru. Here, he commissioned his own pyramid, a far grander structure than those of his predecessors at El Kuru. Its size and the richness of the, albeit plundered, burial goods found within attest to his enduring status and the continued wealth of the Kushite kingdom, even after the loss of Egypt. His pyramid at Nuri would become the burial site for Kushite royalty for generations. Taharka's legacy is thus a complex tapestry of monumental achievement and tragic defeat. He was undoubtedly one of the greatest builders of the 25th dynasty, leaving an architectural imprint that testified to the zenith of Kushite power and cultural expression. He was a formidable international figure who dared to challenge the might of Assyria and for a time, held his own. His resilience in the face of repeated invasions was remarkable. Yet, ultimately, his reign witnessed the loss of Egypt, the jewel in the Kushite crown. He remains a colossal figure, a pharaoh who presided over an era of unparalleled splendor and faced down the greatest military power of his age, leaving behind a legacy in stone and legend that continues to fascinate and inspire. While the annals of history, carved in stone and inked on papyrus, predominantly recount the deeds of kings and the destinies of empires, the true current of any civilization flows through the daily lives of its ordinary people. The grand pronouncements of Pa, the scholarly endeavors of Shabaka, and the monumental constructions and epic struggles of Taharka were all underpinned by the toil, faith, and resilience of the Kushite populace. To understand the world of the Black Pharaohs fully, we must step away from the gilded throne rooms of Memphis and Napata, and the blood-soaked battlefields of the Levant, to walk the dusty paths of Nubian villages and the bustling marketplaces of its towns. Life in Kush, the Nubian heartland stretching roughly between the first and sixth cataracts of the Nile, was inextricably linked to the great river itself. For the vast majority of the population, the farmers and their families, the Nile was the arbiter of existence, its annual inundation the lifeblood of their agricultural society. Their villages, typically clusters of flat-roofed, mud-brick dwellings, clung to the fertile ribbon of land bordering the river, a vibrant green strip contrasting sharply with the harsh, sun-baked desert that pressed in from either side. A typical Kushite home was a simple yet functional structure, well adapted to the climate. Walls were constructed from sun-dried mud bricks, thick enough to provide insulation against the scorching daytime heat and retain warmth during the cooler desert nights. Small, high windows allowed for ventilation while minimizing direct sunlight. Roofs were often made of palm logs and thatch, covered with a layer of mud, and frequently served as an additional living or sleeping space, especially during the hot season. Inside, floors were of packed earth, perhaps covered with reed mats. Furnishings were sparse, low stools, woven baskets for storage, pottery vessels for water, grain, and beer, and perhaps a simple wooden bed frame for the head of the household, though many likely slept on mats. The agricultural year revolved around the Nile's flood. When the waters receded, leaving behind a fresh deposit of fertile black silt, the intensive work of planting would begin. The primary staple crops were hardy grains perfectly suited to the African climate, sorghum and millet. These formed the basis of the Nubian diet. Barley was also cultivated, not just for food, but crucially for the brewing of beer, a thick, nutritious, and mildly alcoholic beverage that was a daily staple for men, women, and children alike, often safer to drink than untreated water and a significant source of calories. Vegetables such as onions, garlic, lentils, and cucumbers, along with dates from the ubiquitous palm trees, supplemented their grain-based diet. Given the narrowness of the floodplain in many parts of Nubia, irrigation was essential to maximize agricultural output. The shrouded, a simple but ingenious counterweighted lever used to lift water from the river or canals into irrigation channels, was a common sight. Its operation, though requiring considerable effort, allowed farmers to cultivate lands beyond the immediate reach of the inundation and to water crops during the dry season. The construction and maintenance of these canals and irrigation systems were often communal efforts, reflecting the strong community bonds within villages. Livestock played a vital role. Goats and sheep were common, providing milk, wool, and occasional meat. Donkeys were the primary beasts of burden. Cattle, a significant symbol of wealth and status, were also raised, particularly in areas with more extensive pasture land. Tending to these animals was a daily responsibility, often falling to younger members of the family. The preparation of food was a labor-intensive process, primarily undertaken by women. Grain had to be threshed, winnowed, and then painstakingly ground by hand into flour using a saddle cairn, a large, slightly concave stone base and a smaller handstone. This daily grind, literally, was essential for making the flatbreads or porridge that formed the core of most meals. Cooking was typically done over open fires or in simple clay ovens, often in a central courtyard shared by an extended family. Beyond agriculture, Kushite society was rich in skilled artisans. Nubian pottery, in particular, was renowned for its quality and distinctive beauty. From utilitarian storage jars to exquisitely thin, highly polished, and intricately decorated drinking cups and bowls, Kushite ceramics were a hallmark of their culture. The black-topped redware, with its characteristic polished red body and blackened rim, achieved through sophisticated firing techniques, was a long-standing tradition. Later periods, especially during the Meroitic era that followed the 25th dynasty, would see the development of incredibly fine, egg-shell-thin pottery painted with vibrant motifs drawing from both Egyptian and indigenous African artistic traditions. Women often played a significant role in pottery production. Textile production was another important craft. While fine linen, favored in Egypt, was likely imported or produced in areas with flax cultivation, perhaps influenced by Egyptian connections, wool from sheep and goat hair were also used. Weaving was done on looms, producing cloth for clothing, blankets, and sails. Leatherworking, using the hides of domestic and wild animals, provided material for sandals, bags, shields, and harnesses. Nubia was, of course, famously known to the Egyptians as Ta-Seti, the land of the bow, but also as the land of gold. Gold mining in the eastern desert was a significant source of wealth for the Kushite kingdom, though much of this precious metal flowed towards the royal treasury, the temples, and the elite. However, skilled metalworkers also crafted tools, weapons, and jewelry from bronze and, increasingly, iron, though iron production would become far more widespread in the later Meroitic period. While many Kushites lived in rural villages, urban centers like Napata, Kawa, and later Meroe served as administrative, religious, and commercial hubs. Napata, situated near the holy mountain of Jebel Barkal, was the primary royal residence and religious capital during much of the 25th dynasty. Life in such towns would have been more diverse and dynamic than in the villages. Here, one would find royal officials, scribes managing temple estates and tax collections, priests performing complex rituals, merchants engaging in local and long-distance trade, soldiers garrisoned for defense, and a host of specialized artisans, sculptors, jewelers, faience makers, often working in royal or temple workshops. Laborers would have found employment in the massive construction projects initiated by pharaohs like Daharka. Socially, Kushite society was stratified. At the apex was the pharaoh and the royal family, followed by a powerful elite of nobles, high priests, and top military commanders. Below them were scribes, lesser priests, skilled artisans, and merchants. The broad base of the pyramid was composed of farmers, herders, and laborers. While this hierarchy existed, evidence suggests that Kushite society, particularly in its earlier phases, may have retained certain egalitarian elements, and the lines between classes were not always rigidly defined. Community cooperation, especially in rural areas for tasks like irrigation or harvest, was vital. Religion permeated every aspect of daily life. While Amun-Ra was the supreme state god, heavily promoted by the 25th dynasty pharaohs and closely identified with the Egyptian Amun of Thebes, the Kushite pantheon was a rich tapestry of deities. Many Egyptian gods, such as Isis, Osiris, and Horus, were readily adopted and worshipped. Alongside them, indigenous Nubian deities held significant sway. Chief among these was Aptemak, the lion-headed warrior god, a powerful and uniquely Nubian deity often depicted with symbols of kingship and military prowess. Dedwen, another Nubian god, was associated with incense, a precious commodity sourced from the south. Personal piety was expressed through offerings at local shrines, the wearing of protective amulets, often depicting gods or sacred symbols like the Ankurut-Jadai, and participation in communal religious festivals that marked agricultural cycles, astronomical events, or important moments in the life of the royal family. Funerary beliefs, while influenced by Egyptian concepts of an afterlife, also retained distinct Nubian characteristics, particularly in burial customs for commoners, which were simpler than royal interments but still involved grave goods intended for use in the next world. Personal adornment was important. Kushites, both men and women, are often depicted in art with elaborate hairstyles, intricate braids, curls, and sometimes extensions. Jewelry, made from gold, silver, faience, carnelian, and other semi-precious stones, was widely worn, not just by the elite but also by common folk, though varying in quality and material. Kohl was used to line the eyes, both for cosmetic reasons and to reduce sun glare. The period of Kushite rule over Egypt undoubtedly had an impact on life in the Nubian heartland. Increased wealth, in the form of tribute and trade, likely flowed south, benefiting the royal court, temples, and perhaps trickling down to certain segments of the population. There would have been an intensified exchange of cultural ideas, with Egyptian artistic motifs, religious concepts, and administrative practices becoming more deeply integrated into Kushite society, even as Kushite traditions continued to assert their distinctiveness. Nubians would have been recruited in greater numbers for military service and administrative roles within the expanded empire. Life for the ordinary Kushite during this era was one of hard work, dictated by the rhythms of the Nile and the seasons, and lived within a strong framework of family, community, and faith. It was a life that, while perhaps lacking the monumental grandeur of their pharaohs' undertakings, was rich in its own cultural expressions, its skilled craftsmanship, and its deep connection to the ancient land of Nubia. It was these ordinary people who formed the resilient bedrock of a kingdom that dared to rule one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. The forced withdrawal from Egypt under Taharqa, and a final, brief attempt by his successor Tantamani to reclaim the northern lands, which also ended in defeat, signaled a fundamental reorientation for the kingdom of Kush. While the dream of ruling the two lands might have lingered in the royal ideology, the practical reality was that Kushite power was now once again centered south of the First Cataract, within its ancestral Nubian territories. This did not, however, herald an age of decline. Instead, it ushered in a period of remarkable cultural innovation and political resilience, as the kingdom's center of gravity gradually shifted further south from Napata, near the Fourth Cataract, to the region around the city of Meroe, situated much further south, between the Fifth and Sixth Cataracts, in the fertile Butana grassland east of the Nile. This southward shift was not abrupt but a gradual process unfolding over centuries. Napata, with its sacred Jebel Barkal and the royal necropolises of El Karu and Nuri, remained an important religious and traditional center for a considerable time. However, Meroe, which had likely been a significant southern outpost for centuries, possessed several advantages that made it increasingly attractive as the new political and economic heart of the kingdom. Its location offered greater security from potential northern aggressors. More importantly, the region around Meroe received more seasonal rainfall than the arid lands further north, allowing for more extensive agriculture beyond the immediate Nile floodplain and supporting larger herds of cattle. Critically, the area was rich in iron ore and timber, the essential ingredients for what would become one of Meroe's defining industries. It is this Meroitic period, often dated from around 300 BCE to 350 CE, though its roots extend earlier and its influences later, that saw the kingdom of Kush develop into a truly distinct civilization, less overshadowed by its powerful northern neighbor, Egypt. One of the most transformative developments of this era was the mastery and large-scale production of iron. While ironworking was known earlier, it was at Meroe that it became a major industry. Vast slag heaps, the discarded remnants of smelting operations, still visible today around the ancient city, bear silent witness to the sheer scale of iron production, earning Meroe the moniker the Birmingham of Africa from some archaeologists. This technological prowess had profound implications. Iron tools were stronger and more durable than bronze, leading to improvements in agriculture and construction. Iron weapons gave Kushite armies a formidable edge. Moreover, iron goods became a valuable commodity for trade, contributing significantly to Meroe's wealth and influence. Another defining feature of the Meroitic period was the full development and widespread use of an indigenous script for writing the Meroitic language. During the Napatan period, including the 25th dynasty, Egyptian hieroglyphs had been used for monumental inscriptions, even when the underlying language was Kushite. Now, while Egyptian hieroglyphs were still sometimes employed for religious texts, the Meroites developed their own unique script, which existed in two forms: a hieroglyphic form, likely derived from Egyptian models but used for Meroitic words, primarily found on monumental inscriptions like temple walls and stelae, and a more common cursive form, a flowing script used for everyday documents, funerary texts, and graffiti. This Meroitic cursive, with its 23 distinct signs, functioned as an alphabetic or syllabic system. The ability to write their own language in their own script was a powerful assertion of Meroitic cultural independence and identity. Although the Meroitic language itself is still only partially deciphered, scholars can read the script and understand the meaning of many words, particularly in funerary contexts, but the full grammar and vocabulary remain elusive. The thousands of surviving inscriptions provide invaluable, albeit often tantalizing, glimpses into their society. The tradition of royal pyramid burials, initiated by Pa at El-Kuru and continued by Taharqa and his successors at Nuri, was maintained with vigor throughout the Meroitic period. The royal necropolises shifted south with the capital, and vast fields of pyramids were constructed at Meroe itself, notably at the north and south cemeteries. These Meroitic pyramids, while continuing the steep-sided Nubian style, evolved their own distinct characteristics. They were generally smaller than those at Nuri but often more numerous, tightly packed together. Their accompanying offering chapels, built against the eastern face, became more elaborate, sometimes featuring pylon gateways and extensive relief carvings depicting the deceased ruler making offerings to deities or triumphing over enemies. These reliefs, rendered in a unique Meroitic artistic style that blended Egyptian conventions with local Nubian aesthetics and even some Hellenistic influences absorbed through trade, provide rich iconographic information about Meroitic royalty, religion, and culture. The pyramids themselves, though plundered in antiquity, still stand as potent symbols of Meroitic power and their enduring belief in an afterlife. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Meroitic society was the prominent and powerful role played by women, particularly royal women. Greek and Roman writers referred to powerful queens of Meroe using the title Candace, or Kandake, which is now understood to be derived from a Meroitic royal title, possibly Kka or Kadk, often held by queen mothers or ruling queens. These Candaces were not mere consorts, they wielded significant political power, commanded armies, commissioned monumental buildings, and were often buried with great wealth and ceremony in their own pyramids. Queen Amani Renas, for example, is famously recorded for leading her armies against the Roman forces in Egypt in the late 1st century BCE, engaging in several years of conflict before negotiating a peace treaty with Emperor Augustus that was remarkably favorable to Meroe. Other powerful queens like Amenishakheto and Amanitor left behind impressive architectural and artistic legacies. This tradition of powerful female rulers suggests a social structure where women, at least at the elite level, could achieve a degree of authority and autonomy perhaps unparalleled in many contemporary civilizations. Meroitic art and architecture developed a distinctive flair, absorbing influences from pharaonic Egypt, sub-Saharan Africa, and, through expanding trade networks, the Hellenistic and Roman worlds, yet synthesizing them into something uniquely Meroitic. Temples continued to be built to Amun, who remained a principal state deity, and Isis, whose cult was immensely popular. However, indigenous Nubian deities rose to even greater prominence. The lion-headed god Apdemoc became a paramount national deity, a god of war and fertility, often depicted with striking iconography, sometimes with a serpent's body emerging from his torso or associated with elephants. Magnificent temples dedicated to Apdemoc, such as those at Naka and Muzawarat Sufra, showcase a vibrant and original architectural and artistic style, distinct from purely Egyptian models. The sprawling, enigmatic complex at Muzawarat Sufra, with its numerous courtyards, ramps, and elephant carvings, remains a puzzle to archaeologists but clearly represents a major ceremonial center. Meroitic pottery also reached new heights of artistry, with exceptionally fine, thin-walled vessels painted with elaborate and lively motifs, including animals, plants, and geometric patterns. Trade was the lifeblood of the Meroitic kingdom. With the political center now further south, Meroe was well positioned to control and exploit trade routes extending deep into Central Africa, east towards the Red Sea, and onward to Arabia and India, and north towards Roman Egypt. Meroe exported valuable commodities such as gold, ivory, ebony, ostrich feathers, leopard skins, incense, slaves, and its own manufactured goods like iron tools and weapons, and fine pottery. In return, they imported luxury items from the Mediterranean world, glassware, wine, olive oil, fine ceramics, and metalwork. This extensive trade network not only brought wealth to the kingdom but also facilitated cultural exchange, evidenced in the Hellenistic and Roman influences seen in some Meroitic art and architecture. For centuries, the kingdom of Meroe flourished, a sophisticated and powerful African state with a rich cultural identity. However, by the early centuries CE, signs of decline began to appear. The precise reasons are complex and likely interconnected. Environmental degradation, possibly caused by extensive deforestation to fuel the iron smelting furnaces, may have impacted agriculture and resources. Shifting international trade routes, particularly the rise of Red Sea ports under Roman influence and the growing power of the Kingdom of Aksum, in modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, which developed its own trade connections, may have bypassed Meroe, diminishing its economic strength. Internal political instability or pressure from nomadic groups like the Blemmyes, Beja, on its frontiers may have also weakened the kingdom. The final blow appears to have come in the mid-4th century CE. Inscriptions of King Ezana of Aksum record a military campaign into Kushite territory around 350 CE, describing the destruction of Meroitic towns. While the extent of Aksumite conquest is debated, it seems clear that by this time, the centralized authority of Meroe had collapsed, and the kingdom fragmented. The glorious era of Kush, which had begun with the powerful chieftains of Kerma, reached an imperial zenith under the 25th dynasty pharaohs, and found a unique and enduring expression in the Meroitic civilization, had finally drawn to a close. Yet, its legacy would live on, influencing the successor cultures that arose in Nubia, and leaving behind a wealth of archaeological treasures that continue to tell the story of this remarkable ancient African kingdom. Okay, we have journeyed from the initial rise of the Kushite kings, their bold conquest of Egypt as the 25th dynasty under Pa, through the cultural consolidation of Shabaka, the monumental achievements and Assyrian conflicts of Taharqa, explored the daily lives of the ordinary Kushite people, and traced the kingdom's evolution into the distinct and powerful Meroitic civilization. Now, we arrive at a crucial, and perhaps equally fascinating, part of their story, how this rich and influential history was largely lost to Western consciousness for centuries, and the painstaking efforts undertaken to bring it back into the light. Continuing from the previous section detailing the Meroitic period, its unique cultural expressions, iron industry, Meroitic script, powerful Candaces, and eventual decline. The story of the Kingdom of Kush, with its Black Pharaohs ruling a unified Egypt and its later vibrant Meroitic civilization, is a testament to a powerful and sophisticated African polity that flourished for millennia. Yet, for a vast stretch of modern history, this remarkable chapter was relegated to the footnotes of Western historical narratives, its significance obscured, its achievements often misunderstood or attributed elsewhere. The journey of Kushite history from grandeur, through near oblivion, to its eventual rediscovery is a compelling drama in itself, reflecting both ancient political machinations and the more recent impact of modern prejudices and the dedicated labor of scholars. The process of forgetting Kush began in antiquity. When the Assyrians, after immense effort, finally drove Taharqa and his successor Tantamani out of Egypt in the mid-7th century BCE, they naturally sought to magnify their own victory and diminish the status of their formidable Kushite adversaries in their official records. More significantly, the succeeding native Egyptian rulers of the 26th, Saite, dynasty, eager to reassert indigenous Egyptian authority and erase the memory of foreign rule, engaged in a deliberate policy of damnatio memoriae against their Kushite predecessors. This involved the defacement of Kushite statues, the usurpation of their monuments, and the careful crafting of historical narratives that minimized or negatively portrayed the period of the 25th dynasty. While the Kushite pharaohs had seen themselves as restorers of Egyptian tradition, their Saite successors often cast them as outsiders, obscuring the deep cultural and religious connections they had fostered. Later, Greek and Roman writers, who formed the bedrock of Western classical education, had a somewhat fragmented and often romanticized understanding of the land south of Egypt, which they generically termed Ethiopia. Figures like Herodotus spoke of long-lived, pious Ethiopians, and Meroe was known as a significant royal capital. However, their accounts were often based on indirect sources, lacked geographical precision, and rarely captured the full political scope of Kushite power or the specific historical reality of its dominion over Egypt. The term Ethiopian dynasty, preserved through Manetho's king lists, was known, but its full implications were not always grasped or given due weight. The more profound obscuring of Kushite history, however, occurred in the modern era, particularly from the 18th to the early 20th centuries, coinciding with the rise of European colonialism and the development of scientific racism. As Egyptology blossomed in Europe, driven by figures like Champollion who deciphered hieroglyphs, the focus was overwhelmingly on the achievements of what was considered pure Egyptian civilization. Within the prevailing racial ideologies of the time, which often posited a hierarchy of races with Europeans at the apex, there was little room for the notion of a powerful black African kingdom that had not only developed a high civilization but had also conquered and ruled Egypt. Such a historical reality directly challenged the narratives used to justify colonialism and the subjugation of African peoples. Consequently, when European explorers and early archaeologists began to encounter the impressive ruins of Nubia, the temples, palaces, and pyramids, there was a tendency to ignore them, minimize their significance, or, most insidiously, attribute their creation to outside, supposedly non-African, often Hamitic or Caucasian, influences. The idea that indigenous black Africans could have been responsible for such sophisticated political organization, monumental architecture, and complex religious systems was largely dismissed or explained away. The Kingdom of Kush, if mentioned at all, was often portrayed as a primitive derivative of Egypt, a mere conduit for Egyptian goods and culture southward, or a source of slaves and raw materials. George Reisner, the American archaeologist who conducted groundbreaking excavations at many Kushite sites in the early 20th century, uncovered vast amounts of crucial evidence but famously struggled to reconcile his findings with his own era's biases, initially proposing that the Kushite elite were light-skinned Egyptianized Libyans who had imposed their rule on a native black population. Despite these prevailing prejudices, The physical evidence of Kush's grandeur was too substantial to be entirely ignored. The 19th century saw intrepid European travelers and explorers like Frédéric Cailliaud and Laurent de Bellefonds venture into Nubia, documenting its remarkable ruins and bringing back sketches and accounts that began to pique European curiosity. The Prussian expedition led by Carl Richard Lepsius in the 1840s was a landmark. Lepsius and his team systematically surveyed and recorded numerous sites in Egypt and Nubia, including Meroe, producing invaluable documentation. While still operating within the intellectual framework of their time, their work laid a critical foundation for future research. The early 20th century was a heroic age for Nubian archaeology. George Reisner's expeditions, sponsored by Harvard University and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, were paramount. Between 1907 and the 1920s, Reisner excavated the royal cemeteries of El Cairo, Nuri, and Meroe, as well as major sites like Jebel Barkal and Kerma. He meticulously uncovered the sequence of Kushite royal burials, revealing the distinctive Nubian pyramids and the wealth of grave goods that spoke to the kingdom's power and sophistication. While his interpretations were often flawed by the Hamitic hypothesis, the sheer volume and quality of the material evidence he unearthed were undeniable and formed the bedrock upon which later, more nuanced understandings would be built. Figures like Francis Llewellyn Griffith made crucial advances in the study of the Meroitic script, beginning the long process of its decipherment. However, the most dramatic and transformative chapter in the rediscovery of Nubian history came in the 1960s, spurred by a modern crisis: the construction of the Aswan High Dam in Egypt. The dam, while essential for Egypt's development, was destined to create Lake Nasser, a vast reservoir that would inundate hundreds of miles of the Nile Valley in Lower Nubia, southern Egypt, and Upper Nubia, northern Sudan, submerging countless ancient sites and settlements forever. In response to this impending catastrophe, UNESCO launched an unprecedented international appeal in 1960, the International Campaign to Save the Monuments of Nubia. What followed was one of the largest and most complex archaeological rescue operations in history. Over 2 decades, dozens of archaeological missions from countries around the world converged on Nubia. They conducted intensive surveys, excavated hundreds of sites ranging from prehistoric settlements to Christian monasteries, and meticulously documented everything that was about to be lost. Iconic temples like Abu Simbel and Philae in Egypt were painstakingly dismantled and relocated to higher ground. The impact of this campaign on Nubian studies was nothing short of revolutionary. It led to an explosion of new information, vastly expanding knowledge about all periods of Nubian history and prehistory. The sheer volume of data collected, and the collaborative, international nature of the effort, helped to sweep away many of the older, racially biased interpretations. It became unequivocally clear that Nubia had been home to a deeply rooted, indigenous African civilization that had developed its own unique trajectory, interacting with Egypt sometimes as a subject, sometimes as a rival, sometimes as a partner, and, during the 25th dynasty, as its master. The campaign brought Nubian history to global public attention, fostering a new appreciation for its richness and complexity. In the decades since the UNESCO campaign, scholarship on ancient Kush has continued to advance significantly. Post-colonial perspectives have encouraged a re-evaluation of earlier interpretations, emphasizing Nubian agency and indigenous cultural developments. Sudanese archaeologists have played an increasingly prominent role in researching and preserving their own heritage. The work of Reisner, while acknowledging his biases, has been re-examined for its invaluable empirical data. Scholars now recognize Kush not as a mere reflection of Egypt, but as a sophisticated civilization in its own right, a vital bridge between the Mediterranean world, Egypt, and sub-Saharan Africa, with its own distinct artistic traditions, religious syntheses, social structures, and technological achievements, such as the large-scale iron production at Meroe. The ongoing efforts to fully decipher the Meroitic language remain a key challenge, holding the promise of unlocking even deeper insights into Kushite thought and society. Yet, even with the script only partially understood, the archaeological and textual evidence already paints a vivid picture of a resilient, innovative, and powerful African kingdom that endured for over 3 millennia. The rediscovery of Nubia's past is more than just an academic exercise. It is about restoring a lost chapter to the annals of world history, a chapter that demonstrates the profound contributions of African peoples to the ancient world. It challenges Eurocentric narratives that have often marginalized or ignored non-Western civilizations. For modern Sudanese people, this ancient heritage is a source of immense national pride and cultural identity. For people of African descent worldwide, the story of the Black Pharaohs and the enduring kingdom of Kush provides a powerful counter-narrative to centuries of colonialist denigration, affirming a rich legacy of African statecraft, innovation, and cultural achievement. Ultimately, the journey of Kushite history, from its glorious peaks, through centuries of obscurity, to its hard-won rediscovery, enriches our collective understanding of the human past. It reminds us that history is a dynamic field, constantly being revised as new evidence emerges and old biases are confronted. The pyramids of El Kuru, Nuri, and Meroe, the majestic temples of Jebel Barkal and Kawa, the intricate pottery, the enigmatic Meroitic inscriptions, and the powerful images of Kushite kings and queens now stand as enduring testaments to a civilization that deserves its rightful place among the great cultures of the ancient world. The century or so when Kushite kings reigned as the 25th dynasty of Egypt was far more than a mere political episode or a footnote in the long annals of pharaonic rule. It was a transformative period that fundamentally reshaped the dynamics of the Nile Valley, left an indelible mark on its cultural and religious landscape, and continues to challenge and enrich our understanding of the ancient world. The legacy of these Black Pharaohs is not simply one of conquest, it is a complex tapestry woven with threads of cultural synthesis, religious revitalization, architectural grandeur, and a powerful assertion of African agency that resonates even today. 1. Reversing the traditional power dynamic, a new Nile Valley order. For much of their intertwined histories, Egypt, with its greater population, extensive agricultural lands, and unified state, had often been the dominant power, exerting political, economic, and cultural influence southward into Nubia. Egyptian armies had marched into Kush, establishing forts, exploiting gold mines, and incorporating Nubian territories as colonial possessions. The 25th dynasty dramatically and unequivocally reversed this centuries-old order. For the first time, rulers from the Nubian heartland, from the kingdom of Kush, conquered and governed the entirety of Egypt, from the Mediterranean delta to their own southern borders. This was not a mere border incursion or a localized rebellion, it was the complete subjugation of one of Africa's oldest and most powerful civilizations by another sophisticated African power. This monumental shift demonstrated the inherent fluidity of power in the ancient world and showcased the formidable strength, organization, and ambition of the Kushite state. It forced a re-evaluation, both in antiquity and in modern scholarship, of Nubia's role, not as a peripheral vassal, but as a major political and military force capable of projecting its power across vast distances. 2. A tapestry of two lands, sophisticated cultural exchange and synthesis. The Kushite pharaohs did not rule Egypt as alien destroyers. Instead, they engaged in a profound and sophisticated process of cultural synthesis, masterfully weaving together Egyptian and Nubian traditions. They adopted the full pharaonic digitary, portrayed themselves in the traditional poses and attire of Egyptian kings, and presented themselves as legitimate successors to the ancient pharaonic lineage. They were crowned in Egyptian religious centers, participated in Egyptian rituals, and utilized the Egyptian hieroglyphic script for their monumental inscriptions in Egypt. Yet, simultaneously, they proudly asserted their Kushite identity. Their art, while employing Egyptian conventions, often depicted them with distinctly Nubian physiognomies, fuller faces, broader noses, and specific lip shapes. They incorporated Kushite royal insignia, such as the distinctive cap crown often worn beneath Egyptian crowns, or the emblematic WAS, two cobras, on their brow, perhaps symbolizing their rule over both Egypt and Kush, or signifying an enhanced royal power. Their Nubian names were used alongside their adopted Egyptian throne names. Most strikingly, their burial practices, while re-embracing the pyramid form, did so with a uniquely Nubian architectural style, steeper, more slender pyramids located in their ancestral Nubian necropolises of El-Karu and Nuri, not in Egypt. This deliberate fusion created a rich, hybrid visual and political culture that was a hallmark of the 25th dynasty, demonstrating a nuanced understanding and respect for both traditions. 3. Guardians of ancient wisdom, preserving Egyptian religious traditions. A cornerstone of Kushite ideology during their rule over Egypt was their self-portrayal as pious restorers of Ma'at, truth, order, and cosmic balance, and champions of traditional Egyptian religion. They viewed the preceding period in Egypt, the late Third Intermediate Period, as one of fragmentation, moral decline, and neglect of the gods. Pa, in his Victory Stele, expressed disgust at the squabbling Egyptian princes and their perceived impiety. Consequently, the Kushite pharaohs embarked on a significant program of religious revitalization. Shabaka's famous commission to inscribe the ancient Memphite theology onto the Shabaka stone, thereby preserving this crucial text from a decaying papyrus, is a prime example of this commitment. This act not only honored the creator god Ptah of Memphis, his chosen administrative capital, but also safeguarded an invaluable piece of Egyptian religious philosophy for posterity. Taharka's extensive building and restoration work at the Karnak temple complex in Thebes, the religious heart of Egypt, and at numerous other sanctuaries throughout the land, further underscored this dedication. Their profound devotion to Amun, a deity revered in both Thebes and at Jebel Barkal in Nubia, served as a powerful religious and ideological link between the two lands, strengthening their claim to legitimacy. This archaizing tendency, a conscious looking back to and revival of older religious and artistic forms, paradoxically made these foreign Kushite rulers appear, in some respects, more traditionally Egyptian than some of their native predecessors. 4. Monuments to eternity. Impressive architectural and engineering works. The 25th dynasty, particularly under Taharka, left behind an impressive architectural legacy. Taharka's grand colonnade in the first court of Karnak Temple, with its towering columns, and his unique kiosk by Karnak's sacred lake, are testaments to his ambitious vision and the engineering capabilities at his command. The expansion of temple complexes at Jebel Barkal and the construction of significant new temples at sites like Kawa in Nubia demonstrate a consistent program of monumental building across their entire realm. The revival of pyramid building for royal burials, albeit in a distinctive Nubian style at El-Karu and Nuri, was a significant engineering and ideological statement. These structures, though smaller than the Old Kingdom pyramids of Giza, required considerable organizational skill, labor mobilization, and architectural planning. They stand as enduring symbols of Kushite power, their unique pharaonic identity, and their deep-seated beliefs in the afterlife. These architectural achievements showcase the wealth of the unified kingdom and the Kushite pharaohs' ability to command resources and labor on a grand scale. 5. A seat at the great powers table. Nubia on the ancient international stage. By conquering and ruling Egypt, the kingdom of Kush was thrust onto the main stage of ancient Near Eastern geopolitics. Egypt had long been a major player in the power struggles of the Levant and its interactions with the empires of Mesopotamia. As pharaohs of Egypt, the Kushite rulers inherited these international responsibilities and rivalries. Taharka's military intervention in Palestine in support of King Hezekiah of Judah against the Assyrian king Sennacherib is a clear indication of this. Though the ultimate outcome of the broader Assyrian-Kushite conflict led to the loss of Egypt, these engagements demonstrate that Kush, under the 25th dynasty, was a recognized and formidable power, capable of challenging even the mighty Assyrian Empire. They were not an isolated kingdom on the periphery but active participants in the complex web of diplomacy, alliance, and warfare that characterized the era. 6. Reclaiming Africa's past, challenging historical prejudices and affirming African agency. Perhaps the most profound and enduring legacy of the 25th dynasty, especially in the modern context, is its role in challenging deeply entrenched prejudices about African history. The very existence of powerful, sophisticated black African rulers who govern one of the ancient world's most prestigious civilizations directly refutes the colonial-era narratives that often portrayed Africa as a continent without history. lacking in significant political development or cultural achievement before the arrival of Europeans. The Kushite pharaohs, and the broader history of the Kingdom of Kush, including the earlier Kerma culture and the later Meroitic civilization, provide undeniable evidence of indigenous African statecraft, complex societal organization, monumental architecture, unique artistic traditions, and advanced technological skills. The story of the Black Pharaohs affirms the complexity, diversity, and dynamism of pre-colonial African civilizations. It highlights the fact that the Nile Valley was a corridor of profound intercultural exchange, with influence flowing not just from north to south, but also from south to north. For people of African descent worldwide, the legacy of the 25th dynasty offers a powerful source of historical pride and a connection to a heritage of kingship, innovation, and resilience. In conclusion, the 25th dynasty was a pivotal era that left an indelible mark on the history of both Egypt and Nubia. They were more than just a temporary line of foreign rulers, they were active agents who reshaped the political landscape of the Nile Valley, fostered a unique cultural synthesis, championed religious tradition, and left behind a legacy of monumental architecture. Their story, once largely obscured, now stands as a vital corrective to incomplete and biased historical narratives, powerfully affirming the significance of ancient African civilizations and their contributions to the shared heritage of humankind. The Black Pharaohs of Kush command a place of honor not just in African history, but in the grand tapestry of world history. The story of the Nubian pharaohs and the broader kingdom of Kush, resurrected from the sands of Sudan in the shadowed recesses of historical neglect, is far more than an intriguing tale of a bygone era. Its re-emergence into global consciousness carries profound implications for how we understand not only ancient history but also our contemporary world. The significance of this powerful African civilization extends beyond archaeological intrigue, offering vital contributions to our collective human story, fostering national pride, and compelling a necessary recalibration of historical narratives that have for too long been incomplete or biased. 1. Expanding the Atlas of Antiquity, enriching our view of world history. For generations, the popular understanding of ancient history, particularly in Western education, has often revolved around a familiar constellation of civilizations: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. While these are undeniably crucial, this focus has inadvertently created a skewed perspective, overshadowing or minimizing the contributions and complexities of other major ancient powers. The full inclusion of the Kingdom of Kush, with its early Kerma culture, its imperial Napatan phase, including the 25th dynasty of Egypt, and its long-lasting Meroitic period, fundamentally enriches and broadens this atlas of antiquity. It demonstrates that the Nile Valley was not a monolithic cultural entity dominated solely by Egypt, but rather a dynamic corridor of interacting civilizations. Kush was not merely a passive recipient of Egyptian influence but an active agent with its own indigenous traditions, capable of influencing Egypt in return, and ultimately, even ruling it. Understanding Kush compels us to recognize the interconnectedness of the ancient world, where ideas, technologies, and political power flowed in multiple directions. It showcases a major, indigenous African empire that developed sophisticated state structures, monumental architecture, unique artistic expressions, and complex religious systems independently and in dialogue with its neighbors. This knowledge moves us beyond simplistic, linear narratives of civilizational development and presents a more nuanced, multipolar ancient world. 2. A tapestry of pride, the Kushite heritage in modern Sudan. For the people of modern Sudan, the ancient kingdom of Kush is not a distant, abstract history, it is a foundational element of their national heritage and identity. The majestic pyramids of Meroe, El Karu, and Nuri, the imposing temples of Jebel Barkal, Kawa, and Naka, and the countless artifacts unearthed from Sudanese soil are tangible links to a glorious past. They stand as powerful symbols of indigenous ingenuity, political strength, and cultural achievement that flourished on their land for millennia. In a world where African histories have often been marginalized or distorted by colonial narratives, the legacy of Kush offers an immense source of pride and inspiration. It provides a deep historical anchor, demonstrating that Sudan was home to one of the world's great ancient civilizations long before the arrival of external influences that later shaped its history. This heritage is increasingly central to Sudanese cultural consciousness, featuring in educational curricula, national symbols, and efforts to promote tourism. The stewardship of these ancient sites, often undertaken by Sudanese archaeologists and heritage professionals, sometimes in collaboration with international partners, is a vital act of preserving not just stone and artifact, but also national memory and identity. Understanding and celebrating this past can play a crucial role in fostering national unity and a shared sense of purpose in a diverse country. 3. Rewriting history, righting wrongs, correcting narratives and acknowledging Africa's centrality. The rediscovery and scholarly re-evaluation of Kushite civilization have been instrumental in correcting biased historical narratives. As discussed previously, colonial-era historiography, often underpinned by racist ideologies, either ignored African achievements or attributed them to external, non-African influences. The compelling evidence of Kushite power, sophistication, and its rule over Egypt as the 25th dynasty directly challenges and dismantles these prejudiced views. Acknowledging the Black Pharaohs and the broader achievements of Kush means recognizing Africa's central and foundational role in the development of human civilization. The Nile Valley, in its entirety, was a crucible of innovation. Kush was not peripheral to this story, it was an integral part of it. This recognition is crucial for a more accurate and equitable global history. It affirms that high civilization, complex societies, state formation, monumental building, sophisticated art, and written language, was not the exclusive domain of any one race or region. Furthermore, the story of Kush has profound significance for the African diaspora worldwide. It provides a powerful historical touchstone, a narrative of Black kingship, imperial power, and enduring cultural achievement that stands in stark contrast to the dehumanizing legacies of slavery and colonialism. It contributes to a richer understanding of African heritage and offers potent symbols of ancestral greatness and resilience. 4. Lessons from the Nile, enduring insights for the modern world. The long history of Kush, with its periods of ascendancy, cultural synthesis, conflict, and transformation, offers timeless lessons relevant to our modern world. The interactions between Kush and Egypt provide a fascinating case study in cultural exchange, demonstrating how two distinct cultures can influence each other, borrow, adapt, and create new hybrid forms, all while maintaining their core identities. The rise and fall of Kushite power, its dealings with formidable empires like Assyria and Rome, offer insights into the dynamics of international relations, the challenges of maintaining vast empires, and the resilience of kingdoms in the face of external pressures. The story of how Kushite history was obscured and then rediscovered also teaches valuable lessons about how historical narratives are constructed, how they can be influenced by contemporary biases, and the critical importance of archaeological evidence and rigorous scholarship in challenging those biases. It underscores the need for diverse voices and perspectives in interpreting the past to arrive at a more complete and truthful understanding. 5. The ongoing quest, future discoveries and the unfolding story of Kush. Despite over a century of archaeological exploration, the story of Kush is far from fully told. Vast areas remain unexcavated, and countless sites await discovery or more thorough investigation. The full decipherment of the Meroitic language remains one of the great scholarly challenges in the field. Achieving it would unlock a treasure trove of primary textual information, allowing the Kushites to speak to us more directly in their own words about their society, beliefs, and history. Modern archaeological techniques, from satellite imagery and geophysical surveys to advanced bioarchaeology and materials science, continue to reveal new insights into Kushite agriculture, diet, health, trade networks, and technological processes. The leadership and growing expertise of Sudanese archaeologists and heritage professionals are crucial for the future of Kushite studies, ensuring that the exploration and interpretation of this heritage are increasingly guided by those whose land holds these ancient secrets. International collaborations, when conducted ethically and equitably, will continue to play a vital role in supporting this ongoing quest for knowledge. Each new discovery, Each refined interpretation adds another layer to our understanding of this complex and fascinating civilization. 6. A more complete chronicle, the indispensable legacy of the Nubian pharaohs. In the final analysis, the contemporary importance of the Nubian pharaohs and the kingdom of Kush lies in their power to make our understanding of the human past more complete, more accurate, and more inclusive. Their story is not merely an addendum to Egyptian history, it is a crucial narrative in its own right, one that highlights the richness and diversity of ancient African civilizations and their integral place in the broader tapestry of world history. The image of black pharaohs ruling over the sacred land of Egypt, restoring its temples, and inscribing their names alongside the most ancient kings, is a powerful one. It speaks of ambition, piety, cultural acumen, and a reordering of ancient power structures. The subsequent flourishing of the Meroitic kingdom, with its unique script, its mighty Candaces, and its thriving iron industry, further attests to the enduring creativity and resilience of the Kushite spirit. By embracing this history, by teaching it, by continuing to research it, and by ensuring its preservation, we not only honor the achievements of a remarkable ancient African people but also enrich our collective human story. The Black Pharaohs of Kush, once figures largely lost in the mists of time and prejudice, now stand rightly recognized as pivotal actors on the ancient world stage, their legacy an indispensable part of humanity's shared journey. Their story continues to inspire awe, provoke new questions, and remind us of the vast, interconnected, and wonderfully diverse world of antiquity. Wow! And that is the epic, almost lost saga of the Nubian Black Pharaohs, rulers who commanded empires, challenged superpowers, and carved a legacy in stone and gold that time tried to erase. From the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal to the bustling iron forges of Meroe, their story reshapes our understanding of ancient Africa and the very foundations of civilization. Feeling that historical thrill? Mind officially blown by what was hidden in plain sight? There are countless more incredible stories like this waiting to be uncovered. Hit that like button if you were captivated, and make sure you smash that subscribe button for Thunga's story time so you don't miss our next deep dive into the epic narratives that shaped our world. Adventure awaits.
Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh. Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh. Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh. Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. á. Lấy máy là quay gỡ cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó không có đỏ đâu, không quay như vậy. Nó không có đỏ. Nói xịn kìa chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gỡ cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó có đỏ đâu, không quay như vậy. Không có đỏ. Má xịn kìa, chứ nói này rồi đâu.
Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gỡ cho anh Thịnh.